Lieutenant Jordan Hale didn't say a word. When she saw the note taped to her locker that morning, just 3 words scribbled in marker: "Try harder, Barbie," and beside it, her uniform was gone, her boots missing, and all that remained was a pair of gym shorts and a torn t-shirt dangling on a rusted hanger, like some cruel joke. But she didn't flinch, didn't ask questions, didn't show a flicker of emotion as she looked around the dim locker room filled with Snickers, behind half-open lockers, because this wasn't new. This was just the latest in a long line of subtle sabotage and whispered disrespect that had followed her since the first day she reported for duty at Camp Granite. A desert base so brutal that even seasoned SEALs groaned at the heat. And while most would have folded under the pressure, Jordan had learned long ago to keep her head down, train harder than the rest, and let her actions shut mouths, because before she ever wore the trident, before she ever completed Bud S with shattered ribs and a sprained ankle, before she ever got her first kill in Kandahar, she was just the daughter of a coal miner in Kentucky, raised on calluses and silence, with a mother who died when she was 9 and a brother who didn't make it back from Fallujah. And every time someone laughed at her, tried to belittle her, or questioned her place in the unit, she heard her father's voice whispering from the porch, "Earn it quietly, Geordie," so she didn't till now. Because this time, they'd crossed a line. Not because they stole her uniform, but because they thought it would break her spirit. And what they didn't understand was that Jordan Hale was forged in something far tougher than sweat or ego. She was built from loss, from duty, from fire that didn't flicker even in the darkest corners of Mockery. So instead of reporting the incident, instead of filing complaints that would vanish into the folders of indifferent officers, she walked straight to the armory, bypassing every questioning stare, and signed out full SEAL combat gear with the quiet authority of someone who didn't need permission to prove herself. And as she laced her boots, loaded her mag, tightened her vest, and painted her face in desert como stripes, she wasn't preparing for a stunt, she was preparing for war. Not against the enemy overseas, but the one within her own ranks. The kind that wore matching fatigues and hid behind smirks and inside jokes. And by sunrise, when the platoon assembled on the sand for morning PT, still laughing about the Barbie incident, they froze mid-joke as she stepped into formation in full-gear Kevlar helmet, M for rifle slung tight, 60-pound ruck on her back, eyes hard as stone, and not a single word left their lips as she stood there in silence, waiting, daring them to laugh again. And when Sergeant Pike, the loudest among them, finally muttered, "What the hell is this?" she stepped forward and said with steady calm, "Obstacle course. Full gear. All of us." Now, and for a moment, no one moved, unsure if it was a joke. But when she turned and ran toward the course, without waiting, they followed not out of respect, but because they couldn't afford to be outdone by her. And what followed was 3 hours of sand, sweat, blood, and humiliation as she led them over walls, under barbed wire, through dead-weight carries and blindfolded rappels, never stopping, never drinking, never slowing, until the last man collapsed near the monkey bars and she stood above him, rucksack still tight, rifle across her chest, face dripping but unshaken and simply said, "You left my uniform in the dirt, so I brought the dirt to you," before walking away without looking back. And from that moment, something changed not just in them, but in the entire base, because word spread fast, and by noon, photos of her in full gear on the obstacle course were being passed around like wildfire, even reaching the office of Commander Rourke, who called her in not to reprimand, but to ask, "Do you want this swept under the rug?" And when she shook her head and said, "No, sir, I want the rug set on fire," he just smiled and said, "Then burn it down properly." And what followed wasn't an investigation. It was a transformation, because the base command quietly rewrote protocols, made respect-based training mandatory, and Jordan was promoted to lead morning PT for all incoming recruits. And though she never sought headlines, her story reached Navy brass, and within weeks, she was featured in the Warrior Within campaign, not because she wanted fame, but because others needed to know that silence was not the same as weakness, and that strength didn't come from shouting. It came from standing tall even when surrounded by laughter. And months later, when a young female cadet named Rivera joined the base and found "Go Home, Barbie" written on her bunk in chalk, she didn't cry or report it. She walked straight to Jordan's quarters, knocked once, and asked, "Can I borrow some gear?" And the next morning, the unit woke to the sight of Rivera, face painted, ruck strapped, standing in the sand just like Jordan had done. And behind her, Jordan Hale stood in full dress uniform, arms crossed, watching, not smiling, not speaking, just letting the next legacy begin. Because change doesn't come from orders or lectures. It comes from pain repurposed, from dignity worn like armor, from women who rise not with vengeance, but with purpose. And as the months turned into years, Camp Granite became a crucible of respect, where every soldier knew that jokes could be broken bones in disguise, and that the strongest warriors weren't always the loudest or biggest. They were often the ones who'd once stood alone in stolen clothes and still refused to back down. And Jordan Hale became more than just a lieutenant. She became a standard, a quiet storm, a walking answer to every man who ever thought strength was gendered. And when she finally rotated out, she left behind a unit that no longer laughed in locker rooms, but nodded in quiet solidarity. Because she hadn't just changed the narrative, she rewrote it, line by line, scar by scar. And long after the jokes were forgotten, long after the base had new names, new faces, new wars to train for, her story remained etched in the concrete of that obstacle course and whispered in every wind that kicked up desert dust. She came back in full gear, and we never mocked again.